And okay, should be good now. So hello everyone, welcome to Angular Kenya session. Today we have Fanis, who is going to be taking us through creating a Trello-like app using Angular and GraphQL. And without much further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Fanis to introduce himself and tell us more about himself. Where does he work? What does he do? And of course, take it away. All right, welcome, Fanis.
Okay, thank you very much. Hi, everyone. So I have a card so that I can introduce myself, and I can start with this. I can share my screen and start over. So give me a sec just to prepare everything.
Sure, no problem.
So I can share my screen. Just let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen, yes.
Nice. So hello, everyone. Thanks for having me, first of all. My name is Fanis Prodromou. Thanks for the great introduction. I'm Angular instructor in the company Code Hub and tech director in the company Code Hub. Actually, is a private institute where we teach either individuals or in companies private training classes. And I'm responsible mainly for Angular, but we have many different topics there. I work as a front-end lead in the company Architects, and at the same time, I'm authoring the book Mastering Angular Reactive Forms, and I expect to have it ready at the end of this month, chronological figure, to meet the deadline. So I have 2 more chapters to fill in, and I guess that then the publisher will need about 2 months to publish it to the market. And I'm a co-organizer of the Angular Athens meetup. And on the bottom right corner, you can see my contact details. So in Twitter, you can follow me in ProdromWeb. In my blog, if you want to check, is blog.profanis.me. I have some cool articles there, or at least they're cool for me. And if you want to connect with me, you can find me in LinkedIn in ProdromWeb. So that's all from my side. This is me. I don't want to spend more time and say more. I think this covers many things. And I think that we can start over the presentation. Is this okay? So yeah, I will start immediately. So the talk for about is a Trello-like app with Angular and GraphQL. So in this talk, in this 40 minutes talk, I will talk about what is GraphQL from zero to some degree so that you know the basic terms and how to use GraphQL. So it's not an advanced topic. It's more like that we start from the very basics, but we will reach a very good level. So this will be the first thing, what is GraphQL. And the second one, and actually all the talk is about, and the applications they have built is about the Apollo framework, which is a very good one. And I use Apollo both in front-end side and back-end side. So for this application, for the Trello app, which I will show you later on how looks like, I have built a backend application, Node.js backend application using TypeScript and MongoDB for the data source, and the communication back and forth between frontend and backend is with GraphQL. And last but not least, the Trello application. Of course, Trello is a huge one, it's a big application, so I will try to approach it and showcase some cases to you. So let's start over with the first one of what GraphQL is. So to explain what the GraphQL is, and since REST has become the dominant API style for communication between backend and frontend, so I will present the GraphQL basics from a REST perspective. So in REST, we have the verbs get, post, put, delete, and patch, right? Some more, but these are the very basics. Now let's think how those verbs affect the data source. So with get, we are querying, we are getting the data, right? So no changes happen in the data source, just getting the data. Whereas with the other verbs, post, put, delete, and patch, we are changing the data source, we are mutating the data source. Now, if we try to group those verbs according to the action to the data source, we can say that with get, we have one group, and this is query, whereas all the others, post, put, delete, and patch, we have another group, and this is the mutations. So we have two different groups. Now, on the other side, on GraphQL, we have only two things, and this is query and mutation. So from now on, when we talk about query, you can immediately think that we're going to get something from the data source. And when we talk about mutation, you can think that we're going to change something in the data source. Either this is create, like we have in post, either update, like we have in put, either delete, or partial update, like we have in patch. So in GraphQL, only two things exist. In order to have a better flow in this talk and to have a common understanding between me and you, let's talk about what is the payload and that we are going to use for this application. So we have the client, and the client wants to send a request to the server. So sends a GET request, and the server responds back with this. This is just a very small JSON payload. And what do we see here is that we have a project, and we have ID, name, some properties, and also we have the tasks, which is another property of the project, an array with some other properties. So nice. This is a very, very, very simple payload. Like I said previously, so the backend that I have built is based on TypeScript. So how can we create this payload in backend using TypeScript? So here, just a parenthesis. I'm going to spend 2 or 3 slides talking about backend and how to use it. I promise you that I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I know that this is mainly for Angular, but it's very, very important to understand all the mechanics. That's why I will spend 2 or 3 slides. So how can we create this payload using TypeScript? We can use, of course, interfaces. And what we can see here, that we have one interface, the project, and we have some properties, ID of type number, name of type string, and tasks of type task array. And here we can see the other one, the other interface, the task, with the property ID of type number and name of type string. Nice. And how about in GraphQL? So GraphQL has a domain-specific language, a DSL, and it is a strict type language. So that's why we have to create types. So let me go back a bit. So here we had interfaces, but what we have in GraphQL, we have types. So type here and type here. So we're creating 2 different types. The first one is project, and what we can see is that we have some properties. ID of type ID, as you can see, is sort of similar to TypeScript. It's not TypeScript, it's GraphQL, but looks alike TypeScript. On the left side, we have the property name, and on the right side of column, we have the type. Another property is name, and the type is string. Please note the exclamation mark, which means that this property is required. And also we have the task, which is a task array. And what about task? What is this? And here we can see the type. It's another type of 2 different properties, ID of type ID and name of type string. So in GraphQL, we have more other types like string, int, float, boolean, and ID. These are all the types that we have in GraphQL. Now, again, in this talk, I'm going to jump between REST and GraphQL, REST and GraphQL. So let's see now the following in REST. Imagine that you have a client and the client wants to play around with projects. And to do this, the backend is like, okay, for this one, for this particular request that you have that you want to play around with projects, I'm going to create a new endpoint. And this is going to be projects. Nice. So in order for the client to play around with this, either for get, post, put, delete, or patch, is going to use always the /projects endpoint. Now think the following. What about if the client wants to play around for a specific task of a specific project? How can we do this? So the backend is like, you know what? I'm going to create another endpoint for this. So we had projects, and now I'm going to create a sub-resource, and this is going to be tasks. So in order to play around for all the verbs, we're going to use the new sub-resource that has been created from the backend. So every time that we want to have something new in the client, of course, we'll have to have a communication with the API developers, with the backend developers. And now we have another request from the client, and the client now wants to play around with tasks, regardless of the project. And of course, for this one, for this particular action, the backend has to create another endpoint, and this is tasks. And again, the same story here. For all the verbs, we're going to use the tasks endpoint. So currently we have 3 different endpoints. But how about now in GraphQL? How can we do this? How can we achieve this? The same story. The client wants to play around with projects, and the backend is like, yeah, you know what? We have our handshake, our communication is based on GraphQL, and for this matter, well, I'm going to create a new endpoint, and this is going to be GraphQL. So if I want to play around with projects, either for query or mutation, I'm going to use the same endpoint, GraphQL. And now, what about if the client wants to play around with tasks, a specific task without any project? Again, the backend is like, we have one endpoint, and this is GraphQL. So in order to get data, or to better say this, to query data, you have to use GraphQL. If you're going to mutate data, you have again to use GraphQL. And what about now if I want to play around with all the tasks regardless of the project? And the backend is like, dude, you know the drill. You know how it goes. We have only one endpoint. And this is the magic here of GraphQL. So again, everything is going to be done based on this endpoint, both for query and mutation. But here we have 2 different questions. The first one is from client, and the other one is from server. So the first one from client is, how can I get the data from the server? Because you know what? We know that in order to get the data from the server using REST, I'm going to use a specific endpoint. But how about with GraphQL? And on the other side, what we have, the other question is, what kind of schema am I going to return and when? But of course, we are front-end developers, we don't care about server, so we are not going to spend that much time, but we will see a little bit how to do this. If we sum up, we can say that the client is responsible for what, and the client and the backend is responsible for how. Now, let's start and dive deeper a little bit on the client. How can I get the data from the server? So the client has the power on its hands to construct the queries. Yeah, the client constructs the queries. This is the magic of GraphQL. So what we see in this slide is a legit GraphQL query, and we also have a timeline at the bottom, so this one. If you are an SQL guy, this might help you. So what we're doing here is equivalent to the SQL query. So P stands for projects and T stands for tasks, different aliases. So what we're doing here is that we are selecting the project's ID, the project's name, and the task's name. The same goes here with the GraphQL query. We're getting the project's ID, the project's name, and the task's name. And imagine now the following, that we have later on that's why I have here the timeline, later on in the product, we have a new request from the product manager, product owner, whatever, and he's like, you know what, I want one more property, one more information to display under each project. And we're like, okay, I just have to change my query. So I will change my query, I will add here description, and boom, I have all the information. That's it. And if later on we want to have the description for each task, again, we have to change the query. And when I say we have to change, the front-end developers have to change the query. We don't have to have for this one, for this particular action, we do not have to have the communication with the API developers. This is only up to us. And now imagine the following. What about if I want just to have a list of projects and regardless of the tasks, we just have to update the query. This hides something very special, and we will see why this is powerful. If you're wondering how the communication between the front end and the back end happens, so this is a screenshot of the developer tools. And what we can see is that all the requests are based on /GraphQL. This is in this port runs, at least on localhost, the server side. All the requests are under the same verb, under post, and what are we posting? The query. So here, for example, we're querying something about get projects. We will see later on how those queries are. Since GraphQL returns a JSON object, we do not have to worry how to construct our templates. So what we see on the left side returns what we see on the right side. So everything is under a JSON. So we don't have to worry about and how am I going to deal with my templates. This is very easy. And now let's jump a bit on the server side. What kind of scheme am I going to return and when? And as I said previously, I promise you I'm not going to spend a lot of time explaining all of this. But it's very good to understand this. So this is the backend code, but it's very important to understand the mechanics. So the backend splits the code in different resolvers, and each resolver is responsible to handle a top-level query. On the right side, we have a query with two top-level queries. The first one is projects, and the other one is tasks. So we have two different things, two different top-level queries. So think the following. What about if we do not query the tasks, like we saw previously? If we omit this completely, if we do not query the tasks, this code will never execute. And this is something very powerful. And the reason is that according to the backend code, here when I have the fetch and return means that I have to open a connection to the database, get the data, do any manipulation if I need, and return the data back to the client. And the same goes for the tasks. But if we do not request the tasks, this code will never execute. This is something that we do not have in REST, because in REST, if you're going to get the projects, most probably you're going to get all the tasks at the same time, unless you have a different communication with the API developers and ask them to create another sub-resource. Now, about the documentation. So we know REST, it's, as I said previously, it's a dominant API style for the communication. And of course, there are plenty of tools out there for documentation as well, such as Swagger or OpenAPI, with I think many more. But what about in GraphQL? So with GraphQL, and particularly with Apollo, we have a playground which at the same time is a documentation. So let me show you. So what we can see here is the playground. It runs under the port 3001, which is the server, and we have also the GraphQL, which is the only endpoint that we expose. So on the left side here, what we can do is construct the queries. And on the right side, we can see the results. If we see here, there is a green thingy, a green button, and if I click it, what we can see is are the queries and the mutations that exist on the backend. So what we see here are the queries and mutations. With queries, we can see that we have projects, tasks, and some more mutations. For example, if I want to create a new project, I'm going to use new project. If I click, for example, on the projects, I can expand this. I can see more details. For example, here with projects, what I can see is that it returns a type of project. And what is project? We see here that we have the type details. Project means that we have ID, name, tasks, and order. So let me close this and let's see a small example. So here I'm going to write a query, project and name. If I click this button, which looks like a video button, actually executes the query. What we can see is that we have the projects, and under project we have two different things. Notice the following, that this is a query of GraphQL. It's not a JSON, looks like a JSON, but it's not. And what we have here is the projects array. And we have two different projects, ready to test and to do. And what about if I go on to more properties, like for example, ID? If I click pay, the execute query, we can see also here the ID and the name. And of course, we can nest it and have more queries. For example, I want for each project to get also the tasks. And from tasks, I want to have only the name, no more than this, only the name. And this is how it looks like. So what we can see here is that we have the first task and the name is, sorry, the first project and the name is ready to test. And under this one, we have only one task. And this is the name with task 2. And under to do project, we have 3 more tasks. And of course, here we can expand it and write more. And now you might be wondering, wait a minute, why do we call this GraphQL? What is the graph here? Because I don't see any graph. Of course, we can go crazy. Let me delete the IDs from here and the ID from here and have it very, very simple. And let's see the following. As you can see here in the documentation, in projects, the project type details has also in the tasks, has also a project. And if we click the project, we can see that we can have the tasks and so on and so forth. Things might go crazy. So here if I'm like, I want to, you know what, I want to have also for this particular task, I want to have the name. Look the following, that we have ready to test, and under this project we have one task with name task 2. And this task belong under the project with name ready to test. And the same goes here. We have another project with name to do, and under the task with name task 1, we have the name of the project. And of course, we can expand this further and have it like I want to have here also this one. And again, I want to have a very huge tree of queries. And whatever we query, we have all the responses back. So as I said previously, this is something powerful on our hands, on the hands of Frontend. So let's continue with this, and having in mind that with Apollo and GraphQL, we have embedded playground and at the same time documentation. Something very important. Again, let's say that here we have a separation and we have on the top REST and on the bottom GraphQL. Think now the following, that we have a client and this client wants to get a list of products and a list of customers. How can we do this? We have to initiate 2 different round trips. 2 different round trips for this one with REST. But what about in GraphQL? For this one, we have to combine both products and both customers in the same query, which means only one round trip. Let me show you how we can do this. Again, let's go back on the query. I'm going to delete everything from here. And what I'm going to do is I want to query only from projects. From projects, I want to query only the name. And this is what we have. And what about now if I want to query only the tasks? I want to get the tasks, and this is all the list of the tasks. And what about now if I want to combine both of them? I want to have a list of tasks, but also I want to have a list of projects. How can I do this? As I said previously, combine them together. And what we can see here under data, that we have tasks, which is an array. Let me close this. And also we have the projects, ready to test and to do. So with GraphQL, we can have only one round trip by combining many queries together. Now, let's talk about the Apollo framework. So in Apollo framework, we saw previously that we have, of course, the queries and the mutations, but we have another flavor of queries, and this is the polling. So the polling executes a query periodically. Let's say that you want to have a query every, 500 milliseconds or 1000 milliseconds and so on and so forth. But if you do not like to have a polling, you can refetch a query on a particular user action, and we will see later on how to use this. Of course, we'll have the mutations, like we saw previously, and we'll have subscriptions. So with subscriptions, we can wire up a GraphQL with a pub subsystem like Redis to implement subscriptions in GraphQL. In a nutshell, what this means is that when server has something ready, it just publishes it to the client, and client just have to have a subscription on this subscription, let's say, on this observer. We have also optimistic UI. So with optimistic UI, we can simulate the results of a mutation and update the UI even before receiving a response from server. We also have pagination. So with pagination, there are many ways to implement it. I think that there is a particular action to invoke, a particular method to invoke, and this is fetch more, if I'm not mistaken. But there are other ways as well to implement the pagination. And also it has an embedded state management. Here, when we listen about state management, it rings a bell, and we're like, whoa, don't we have NGRX, NGXS, Akita, and many others? Do we need to have also something else, a new state management? And actually, I'm encouraging you to start using the state management of Apollo, because this comes for free and utilizes in a very smart way the cache, and explain later on what this cache is all about. And if you think about state management, if you like, and if you like to use other state management tools, you can merge them together. You can combine more than one together. And of course, it has a very nice error handling. Now, let's say that this is the theory. These are the basics. Now, let's talk about the Trello application. In order to split my work, what I really like to do is to split the work in 4 different steps. So by those 4 different steps, we're going to apply the basics. The first one is the documentation, which means that we have first to have a look on the documentation. The second one is to construct a query. The third one is to create a service, an Angular service, and use the query. And the fourth one is to consume the service in the component. So these are the steps that we are going to follow and showcase some things about how to create a Trello app, which is this thing. This is what we're going to create. So the funny thing here is that if we write Trello in Greek letters, like we see here, we read it like Trello, and Trello means crazy. So we're going to create our crazy board. So in this application, the vertical columns are the projects. So we have here 1, 2, 3 different projects, and the items inside are the tasks. Okay, so let's start by saying, how can I get the projects? As I said previously, we have to start with the documentation. So this is the step 1. So we need to get the project. So we don't care about mutations, but we care, so we'll cross this, but we care about queries. What do we have about queries? We have project, projects, task, and tasks. What do we want to get? Projects. So this is what we're focusing on. The second step is to construct the query. We're constructing the query and having like I want to get projects, and from projects, I'm going to have the ID property, the name, the order, and from tasks, I'm going to have the ID and the name. The third step is to construct the service. And this is no more than a very, very, very simple service. We can see that it's provided in root, which means that we have a singleton service. But now, to convert this service to a more meaningful to Apollo client, we will extend the query, this one, which accepts one generic type. And this is the response this query will return. So we use this one, the query, and we define here the response. This particular query is going to return a projects array, and this is the type. And here in the document, we have to paste the query that we constructed previously. And this is our query. Projects ID, name, order, and from task, I want to have the name. And the fourth step is the component. So what's happening in the component? So let's see the following. In the constructor, of course, since we have a service, we have to inject the service. We'll have the injection, we'll have the project GQL, and in init, I'm doing the following. This project GQL dot watch value changes. Does it ring a bell when you see the value changes? It reminds me like we have reactive form, something like this, but in general that we have something that we have an observer. So the important here is that we are using the watch property of the query, and by doing this, we register an observer to the cache. This means that whenever we have a change on the cache, the embedded cache of GraphQL, this property, data dollar, is going to automatically update it. And of course, the next step is to start using the data in the component, meaning the template. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the component on the template side, but what is important here to understand is the flow. So imagine the following, that we have a component like we saw previously, and we have a watcher. Where do we have the watcher? In the Apollo client, and the Apollo client itself is responsible to send the query in the GraphQL API server. And the GraphQL API server, what it does, return the data, and from the data, we immediately update the cache. This is something that happens automatically. Something that we notice here is that we have two different arrows, this one and this one. This means that this query that we see here, we have the option to query the GraphQL API server, but at the same time, we have the option to query the cache. Yeah, we use the same query either to use it on the server or in our cache. Now, let's see a demo. This is the application, this is the Trello or the crazy board, the Trello board that we are going to use. What we can see here is that we have 1 and 2 different projects, and inside this one, we have some tasks. If I click this one, we can see a model, and we can see that this is task 2 in list ready to test. If we click this one, we can see that this is task 1 in list to do. Of course, this is empty. This is, let's say, a work in progress. I plan to improve it even more, but we don't care about this on the time spinning. So what else can we do with this application? We can rearrange it, drag and drop. If I want to have this here, we expect this to work, but it doesn't. But this is part of the talk. We are going to fix this. We're going to fix and have it like, if I drop it here, I want to persist it there. And also we can create some more tasks, like I want to create a task, whatever, task 3, and we can see it. Now, let's see a little bit about the code. Let's see the code. So we have the components and the containers. The components, I named like components, and here I have some dump component, let's say, and in the containers, I have just the smart component. So in the project list component, I inject the project list service, and what is this all about? Let me click and follow this. Actually, what we see here is like a facade pattern that I'm using different other services in order to either to add a project, either to remove a project, to add task in project, and get projects. And the get project is what we saw previously, that we have here the watcher. So we are watching about the changes. I'm not going to have something here about comments, and I will explain later on what these comments are, but let's continue on the next one. Currently, what we saw is how to get the projects, right? How can I add the project now? Things might go more complex here. We're going to follow the exact same flow that we followed previously. But the thing here is that we're going to have a manually interaction. Manually, we're going to update the cache. And to do this, we're going to follow 3 different steps. The first one is get a slice of the cache. The second one is mutate the data object. And the third one is write new data in the cache. So 3 different steps. But in order to work, like I said previously, the first step is the documentation. Now, we do not care about queries. We care about only mutations. And what we want to do, we want to create a new project. Okay, so if I create a new project, here what we can see is that this method, this mutation, returns a project. If I click, I can see more details like we saw in the active playground. The second step is to create the mutation. And the mutation is new project, and I'm providing here the input. And in order to create a new project, according to the backend code, we have to provide just one property, and this is the name. Here we can have a separation. This one is the request. the request to the server, and this is the response. As soon as we have a correct response from the server, I want to get the ID and the name. So again, even on the mutation, on the client side, we are responsible to construct the queries. And let's see now the service. So for the service, we have again one more simple service, but of course we need to have more semantics about Apollo client GraphQL. And we have to extend now, this time, not the query, but we have to extend the mutation. And the mutation accepts two different types. The first one is the response, and the second one is the request variables. What will be the response and what are the request variables? And here in the mutation, we have to paste our query that we generated previously. When we start first with GraphQL and we see the mutations and all of these weird things, it's very odd because at the same time, at the first time, it's like really odd. But I promise you, if you start working with GraphQL, you need to write about 3-4 mutations, and you will get used to it because it's part of how the syntax of GraphQL. Now, the fourth step is the component. What do we have to do? Of course, we have to inject the service that we have just created, new project GQL. This is at least the name that I decided to name it. And imagine now the following, that we have a button, we click the button and we call this method, the method addProject, which accepts one property, and this is the name of type string. What we have to do is to call the mutate, provide the input, and I can say that this part, if you follow the documentation of GraphQL or if you follow this talk, this is the easy part. What it makes it even more complex is how to update the cache. And in order to do this, you use the second property of the mutate method. So here we can see this object, and particularly we are going to use the update method. With update, we are going to manually update the cache. To do so, the first step is to get the slice of the cache. And this is how we do this. Please note here that we use a read query. By using read query method, what we're doing is that we're sending a query to the cache. So the next step is to mutate the data object. So of course, more mutation goes here. I didn't have that much space in this slide. And the third step is to write new data in the cache. So here we had read query, and here we have write query. So again, we get something from the cache, and we manually update the cache. Now, let's see an example. So the first thing is to make it work, add another list. If I want to create here, for example, WIP from work in progress, I want to click add list and immediately to see this happen on the code. Of course, we'll have an issue and we will try to fix this. Let me open the developer tools, focus on the network, let me clear everything, and I will reload. Previously that we created another list, a new list, of course this created in the backend, but we didn't see it because we didn't use the cache. So how can we use the cache? In the add project, what we have here is new project GQL mutate. So let's dive deeper on this one. What is this all about? New project GQL is the mutation that we saw in the slides, no more than this. We're using the new project GQL, the mutate. We're providing here the name. And now let's remove these comments from here. Add a comma. And let's spend some more time. The first one, as I said previously, is get the slice of the cache. The second one is to update the state. And the third one is to update the cache. And if we go in the browser, and if I have here, let me clear everything. If I write work in progress and add list, immediately we can see that work in progress added in the list. If you notice here, we have only one request, and this request is about the mutation. We didn't get anything back, but at the same time, we can see it in the list. Now, let's try to have a connection of the cars. Connection meaning to understand how this works. I'm going to collapse this and collapse this one. When we use, in order to get the project, what we did is that we used this project GQL, right? So this is a particular service which runs a particular query in the API server. Let me open now the add project and look here. So what we're doing here is that we use read query, and as I said previously, we have the option to send a query directly to the cache. And in order to do this, you have, of course, to use a query. So this one, the project GQL, is exactly the same with this one. So what we're doing, we're getting the slice from the cache, we're updating the slice, we're updating the cache, and then we write again on this query. So this means that when we write something, this one, because we have a watch, we have an observer, we observe the changes on the cache, we'll immediately update the data. We have also the option here to, instead of watch, to have fetch. What will happen? We'll have fetch. Let's see. So here we update the cache, but we do not have the observer anymore. So if I create something else, like, I don't know, a test, at least we have it on the backend, but we do not have it on the UI unless we reload it. Why this happened? Because, of course, we deleted the observer. So if you remember previously, we said about that we have also the option to refetch a query. If we try, let me reload. If I try to rearrange this and switch to do with a work in progress, we want this to work. How can we do this? Well, we're going to use the update projects order as a method, and this method, instead of using the update, now you use something else, and this is refetch queries. This is truly, I really like this part, because the thing that we're doing is that, you know what, I want to refetch this query. Who uses this query? The update projects order is totally unaware of who uses this particular query. The only thing that I'm saying here is I want to get the query, and Apollo does all the magic. So this means that when this action is done, I'm going to refetch this particular query, and this query is already used by get projects. So let's see. Now, if we rearrange this, we can see that here we have the work in progress. Let's see the network. So in the network, what we can see is that we have two different round trips. The first one is update projects, and the other one is the get projects. So two different things. I think that I don't have something else to showcase. So the other one is how to remove, for example, a project, and works exactly the same with a watcher and utilizing the cache. So when you start working with GraphQL and you see that you have the option of refetching the queries, and because this is a lot easier, it's easier to start with this. And this is the very first step that I followed myself. But I'm encouraging you that as soon as you gain some experience with GraphQL, stop using the refetch queries and start using the manually update the cache, and particularly how to use the update method of the mutation. So now let's close with some more configuration. And the configuration is how to make things work, how to connect the front end with the back end. What I have here is a GraphQL module. And in GraphQL, I provide the Apollo options, and I'm using a factory. And the factory is the create Apollo. So what we can see here that Apollo uses something like links. In different, for example, in Node.js, we can see that those links are called like middlewares. Someone else might call it like interceptors, and it does something like this, like intercepting. So with links, we can, for example, concat together the error handling on error link, which means that we have two different kinds of errors. The first one is the GraphQL errors, which means that we might have something erroneous on the query. And the other one is the network error. this is something very cool. And the reason is that imagine the following, that if you have a GraphQL error or a network error, you can, from this part, you can throw a toaster message, an alert message to the user saying that something went bad. And the other one that I'm using here, apart from the on error link, I'm using the HTTP link. This is something, the HTTP link from Apollo Angular HTTP. And this is the way that we connect the front end with the backend. And here, what we're doing is that we're providing the URI, which is the URI of the backend. Now, let's close with this one of understanding the problems. So the first problem that we solve with GraphQL is the multiple round trips. There are many cases that we have to avoid the round trips. If we can do this, then we can utilize the GraphQL and combine more than one queries in the same, and boom, send it to the server. The second one is way more data transfer than required. So in the past, I used to work in the hospitality, and the endpoints that we had to exchange between backend and frontend had a lot of information, So what we had to do is construct, have the conversation all the time with the API developers and ask them to create more than one endpoints, maybe for the same, for one view. And we did this because we wanted to eliminate the data. So with GraphQL, we do not have this problem because anything that we need, we have just to create the query. And the third one is that we no longer have a problem about API versioning and maintenance. And the reason is that if the backend, for example, wants to create a new method, it's going to create a new query or a new mutation, no more than this. Since we do not have complex code on the backend, or the complexity, mainly the complexity, some of the complexity, especially for the query, is on front end, we no longer have to worry about API and versioning. And that was it. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I will be more than happy to try to answer it.
All right. Thank you very much, Fanis. That was a very intriguing session. And I'd like to open the floor to any questions that any one of you would have for Fanis with regards to this. You can just unmute your mic and ask the question. Okay. So if
No
wait for. Yeah. Okay. So I wait for someone. I have a question myself. So I wanted to understand. So see the way with REST APIs work, right? For example, if you want products, right, you have to provide the URL that let's say the URL the API endpoint that says something / product, and then if it's something else like customers, you have another one something / customers. So you mentioned that you can do this with just one round trip. So how would you implement that when it comes to the code itself? Because as I saw that the URL is just one URL, which is like something / GraphQL, and then when it comes to fetching that specific data, where does it happen, whereby you can choose either you want the products or you want the customers?
Do you mean on the backend or on the front end? How to do this?
On the front end, sorry, the front end. Yeah.
So on front end, how we do this is by, let me show you, is by constructing different queries. So for example, I want to have a query for tasks and for projects. So in the same query, we can have two more than one resolvers, let's say, GraphQL queries, if this is what you ask. And the response is that we have a tasks array and the projects array.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then so,
yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, and then so, for example, now in this case, right? I saw something in the code. If you open your editor, if you could open your editor.
The editor, which one? This one?
The VS Code, sorry.
The VS Code, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, yeah. So I just wanted to understand. So when it came to the service, right? The project, yes, the service. So do you have where when you fetch data from the database, like just getting the data from the database? Do you have a function for that? I mean, a
Yeah,
method, sorry.
not in front end side. I have it on the backend. I can show you. So, for example,
Okay.
imagine the following: that you have the new project GQL, and this
Yeah.
is just querying.
Mhm.
Sorry, just mutating. And here we have the new project. Let me close this and
Okay.
let me open. This is a monorepo. And let's open the server. And on the server, what we have, not this one, on the services, I think. This is, let me find it, API and on the project. Yeah. So what we have here are different resolvers. I will close this and I will have it like with new project GQL.
Yeah.
What we can see here is that on the mutation, actually in this part, we are defining the queries and the mutation that exist for project resolvers. And for project, we have the new project. What does that mean? This means that once we're going to invoke this particular resolver, we're going to invoke this, call this this code. Sorry, wrong. And this is actually the project GQL project model create. This is based on Mongoose, right?
Yeah.
This one, the new project GQL, this one is exactly the same with this. If you see new project and new project. So this is how the code works.
Okay. 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 Yeah, I think I've understood. Yeah.
And the same goes, of course, with queries. So here we have the projects, and let me go back on the project list service and have the project GQL. Again, here we have the projects, and we can see even here that we have projects. And what happened with the project is that we execute a different part of the code.
Okay. So that means, for example, if let's say this is an API that gets information of projects and then also customers, what you can do is, of course, create your resolver for customers and then include it in the query section, right?
Exactly, as you said.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. And then, of course, creating a TypeScript file that specifically handles customers, right? So the same way this one specifically handles projects.
So what I have here is that I have on the GraphQL, I have the mutations and the queries. So as you said, you have to create something else about the customers in order to make this work. And actually, on the server. So we have project and task, different things. So we have to create the same thing for customers, let's say. And for customers, this is something, think of this like being the configuration, and having the configuration, then you have to define the types. So these are the types that we had in the talk, in the slides. So the customer would be a new type of customer, some properties and some inputs or some queries or some mutations. And then let me show you the following. So when we have the types that we're defining in the GraphQL, we have to follow with particular resolvers. So the resolvers, we can say that they are sort of the same with controllers in REST. So what we see is that we have a task, and this task is this one. We have tasks, and tasks is this one. And the same goes for new task. And this is, of course, as you said, we have to do this for customers.
Okay. All
And
right.
this is something. And this is the part that I showed previously, that from the task we can query a particular project. This is a nested query.
Okay.
If we pick the project, we do not invoke this part of code at all. I hope this answered the question.
Okay. And so, does GraphQL have a problem with, for example, if you're querying some data, it brings with it like everything else that you don't need, or is it like very specific and straight to the point that I just need data for a specific endpoint? Like let's say I just want customers. Does it have that issue of if I'm gonna call an endpoint, it's gonna give me all the data, or it's very specific to what it needs?
Can you please repeat? I think that I lost you a bit. Sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm asking, does GraphQL have an issue with, say, you want specific data, but then it just gives you everything and it's really up to you to decipher what you need? Or what could be the downside with GraphQL if there is any?
Actually, a downside. Speaking of data, I think that you said previously, myself,
Yeah, like in fetching data, yeah.
I didn't find any problem, any downside on this thing.
Okay,
Uh,
okay.
and if there is any downside, there is one. For example, what we can have with REST, we can have sometimes we have cache servers in order cache servers based on each endpoint, different endpoint. If, for example, a user requests for project /1 /task /2, I'm going to cache this one for a particular time. I'm going to cache this for 10 minutes. This is something that we use in REST. This doesn't exist in GraphQL because everything happens on under one endpoint. But of course, there are other mechanisms in order to use cache. This is one downside. So if you do not have experience with GraphQL, of course, you need more time to gain this.
Uh, And so, from your own perspective, what would you say is the learning curve for GraphQL for anyone who wants to get started with it? Is it
It
a
has
steep learning curve or it's pretty simple?
No, it's a steep learning curve. It is because you have to understand many. So the first time that I had to create an application using GraphQL, the complexities was both as a backend, as a full stack developer, the complexity was both in backend and in front end. But as soon as you set up everything, then things are easier. But it has a steep learning curve. Because you know what? The thing is that it's totally different way of thinking. So whenever we want to get the data, comes in mind is that, of course, I want to have a new HTTP client, and I'm going to invoke a new endpoint, send a request to a new endpoint, getting the data, have some RxJS resolvers, RxJS operators, and boom, I will do everything on the component. With GraphQL, it's something different. Of course, you have all the power of RxJS. You can do whatever you like, but you also have to do the queries.
Okay.
So it has a steep
Learning
learning
curve.
curve.
Okay.
But in terms of performance, this is the thing. It has very good performance, very, very good performance. That's why many times they use it also in mobiles because the mobile client, has the option to request particular properties.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Um, Anyone else who has a question? Okay. So I know that some people who joined us probably a bit late, but don't worry. This session is recorded, so you'll definitely have access to the content by tomorrow evening via the Angular Kenya YouTube channel. So if you've not subscribed to Angular YouTube channel, Angular Kenya, please just go onto YouTube and subscribe, and you're definitely going to get all the content that you may need with regards to Angular. And if there are no questions, I'd like to say a big thank you to Fanis,
Thank you very
who
much.
was taking his time to take us through this. Personally, I started off with Angular. I think it's about 2 years now, and GraphQL was one of the things that I've always been taught to always check it out when it comes to as a front-end developer. It'd be good to at least also get to understand how GraphQL works, apart from just using REST APIs. And having at least this session has given me this personally, it has given me like this another perspective on how I could see GraphQL. So thank you very much, Fanis,
Thank you.
for this.
Good to hear.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't know, is it possible to probably have access to probably the GitHub repo that
Yeah,
has all
definitely.
this, or yeah,
Definitely.
okay,
So I will share with you both the slides and the repo.
yes,
And you, of course, you can spread it around.
okay.
Definitely.
Oh yeah, sure,
My
sure,
pleasure.
definitely. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks for
So
having
if
me.
yeah, if anyone else wants to reach out to Fanis, please, his contacts are here, so definitely reach out to him, whether on Twitter or LinkedIn, and also check out his blog and see if you can have a brief chat on anything with regards to Angular and GraphQL. And of course, Fanis will definitely would love to have you back again for another session. But thank you very much for taking the
Thank you
session.
very
Do
much.
you
Thank
have
you.
do you have anything else to say for
No,
the
I'm
people?
covered, and yeah, that's all from my side, actually.
Yeah, and oh,
Thanks
and by
everyone
the
for
way,
attending.
yeah, I personally never knew Fanis that much. I think it was through the when he submitted his application. We were very interested in getting to know more about Angular because when we started off more of like basic stuff. But having Fanis on board and giving us this whole other perspective on what Angular can really do with different technologies, it's really, really eye-opening. And thank you very much. And yeah, if anyone is interested in probably joining Angular Kenya, please always just check on Twitter. We are always there. So we usually post the days that we have sessions. And as a reminder for those who probably don't know, when you RSVP for our sessions, we usually send you the meeting details by email. And of course, this is because we want to avoid Zoom bombing and all that. But yeah, thank you very much for all those that took their time to join us. And yeah, I'll definitely share the resources but with the YouTube video that's going to be posted. And so yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
All right,
Bye.
have a good night, guys.
You too. Have a good night.
All right.
Bye bye.